Ever feel like you're just drowning in information? Every headline, every notification. It can be a lot.
It really can.
Well, that's exactly why we do the deep dive. We sort of cut through all that noise, pull out the key stuff, and, well, give you a shortcut to understanding these big, complex topics.
Think of us as your guide through the maze.
Exactly. Making sense of it so you don't have to dig through everything yourself.
And today, we're stepping into the shadows, really. We're looking at an organization that was, for a long time, nicknamed No Such Agency, the National Security Agency, the NSA.
That's the one. For this deep dive, we've gone through a pretty detailed overview covering the NSA. Its beginnings, how it works, and the controversies, too. There are quite a few.
It's a fascinating story, definitely. And sometimes, well, pretty sobering when you get into the details.
So our mission today is pretty clear. Trace where this agency came from, how it changed over time, look at its main jobs, and understand the big questions it raises.
We want to pull out the most crucial insights for you.
Okay, let's get into it then. Before there was an NSA, you had World War II. That conflict really hammered home how vital it was to intercept and, understand what the enemy was saying.
Right, and that's where the Signal Intelligence Service, the SIS, came in. They were the original code breakers, essentially.
And after the war ended, well, the need for that kind of intelligence didn't just disappear.
Not at all. So the SIS got reorganized, became the Army Security Agency, or ASA. It operated under the Director of Military Intelligence.
But people started realizing that these different efforts, they needed to be brought together more effectively.
Yeah, a push for centralization. So 1949, they create the Armed Forces Security Agency, ASA. This was under the Department of Defense, reporting to the Joint Chiefs.
But here's the interesting bit. AFSA was supposed to centralize things, but it didn't really manage full coordination, did it?
No, it struggled, especially with coordinating with the civilian agencies, State Department, CIA, FBI. They all had their own intelligence streams and needs.
That lack of coordination seems key.
It really was. It showed that just putting things under one name wasn't enough. You need genuine, seamless cooperation across the whole government for intelligence to work properly. That was the big takeaway from AFSA's limitations.
So President Truman saw this wasn't working quite right. In December 1951, he kicked off an investigation.
And that turned out to be critical. The investigation basically confirmed AFSA wasn't cutting it, not meeting the country's needs.
It raises that question, how do you fix something so vital when it's underperforming?
Well, Truman's answer was a major redesign, a bunch of improvements that led pretty directly to the birth of the NSA as we know it.
The key moment was a National Security Council memorandum, October 24th, 1952.
And literally the same day, Truman issued a second memo specifically ordering the creation of the NSA.
Things moved fast then.
They did. The official switch happened just days later. November 4th, 1952, a directive from the Secretary of Defense, Robert Lovett, officially changed AFSA's name to NSA.
And gave it the whole mission for communications intelligence.
Exactly. All comms intelligence responsibilities landed with the new NSA.
Now, this is where that nickname comes in, right? Because Truman's original order was classified.
Precisely. The agency's actual existence wasn't public knowledge at first. That secrecy is what created that whole no such agency reputation. It was born in the shadows, really.
So its initial work was obviously shaped by World War II and the Cold War starting up.
Definitely. But as the decades rolled on, its operations grew massively. And with that growth came more debate, more scrutiny.
Okay, let's fast forward a bit. The 1960s, Vietnam, the NSA had a role there, didn't it?
It did. They provided intelligence related to the Gulf of Tonkin incident, the supposed attacks on U.S. ships that escalated involvement.
But the 60s also saw something darker emerge, the Minaret program.
Ah, yes. Minaret. That was a very controversial secret program. The NSA was monitoring the phone calls of some pretty high-profile Americans.
Whoa.
Senators Frank Church, Howard Baker, civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr.,
Mhm.
even journalists and athletes who were critical of the Vietnam War.
Wow. Monitoring sitting senators and Dr. King.
Yes. And it wasn't just outsiders criticizing it later. An internal NSA review, their own review, called Minaret, disreputable if not outright illegal.
That's quite an admission from inside the agency.
It really is. Shows the internal tensions even then.
Okay, let's jump to the 80s and 90s. The challenges seemed different then, more infrastructure related.
Yeah, the nuts and bolts. Defense budget cuts meant maintenance got deferred, kept getting put off, and eventually that caught up with them.
How so?
Well, January 2000, there was a huge network outage at NSA headquarters. Lasted 3 whole days.
3 days for an agency built on information flow.
Exactly. Imagine. It really highlighted how much they relied on their tech infrastructure and how fragile it had become.
The director at the time, Michael Hayden, apparently called it a wake-up call.
He did. A stark reminder they needed to reinvest urgently in their systems.
But interestingly, during this same period, the defensive side of the NSA, the IAD, started opening up a bit.
That's right. The Information Assurance Directorate, IAD. They became, well, slightly less opaque. For instance, 1997, an NSA scientist actually gave a public technical talk at a cryptography conference.
First time ever.
First time ever. It was about elliptic curve cryptography, which is, a more efficient way to do encryption using some advanced math. A big deal in the crypto world.
That's a real shift from total secrecy.
It was, and that collaborative spirit seemed to continue for a while. The IAD supported the open process to choose the Advanced Encryption Standard, AES, back in 2000.
AES is everywhere now, right? Securing Wi-Fi, online transactions.
Pretty much. And people like Susan Landau credit folks inside IAD, like Brian Snow and Michael Jacobs, for really building bridges with academics and industry. They even backed an encryption standard developed in Europe, which was quite something.
Then came 9/11.
Yes, September 11th, 2001. A massive turning point. Afterwards, there was this sense, a perceived public mandate maybe, for a huge expansion of surveillance powers.
And that changed the NSA's direction again.
Dramatically. Some accounts say that period of, let's call it trust and partnership with the outside crypto community, it started to fade.
How?
Well, key people at IAD who'd pushed for that openness, they either left or got moved. The priorities shifted.
And big new surveillance projects started.
Right. Trailblazer, for example, ramped up in 2002. But it ran into trouble. Internal disagreements, investigations. It got canceled in 2004.
So what followed Trailblazer?
The Turbulence program started around 2005. The idea was smaller, more flexible components, but it also included offensive cyber warfare capabilities.
Offensive cyber tools. That sounds like a significant step.
It was, and Turbulence didn't escape criticism either. Lawmakers raised concerns about its scope and cost.
Looking at the big picture, you see the NSA trying to handle its intelligence mission and deal with this explosion in cyber threats.
Exactly, which led to President Bush signing NSPD 54 in 2008. That officially designated the NSA as the lead agency for protecting federal government networks from cyber terrorism. A huge responsibility.
Okay, so how do we break down what the NSA actually does? The overview we looked at has these categories.
Right, it helps to think of it in maybe 3 main buckets. First, collecting intelligence overseas. That's the Global Access Operations, GAO.
Okay, overseas collection.
Second, collecting intelligence inside the U.S. That falls under Special Source Operations, SSO. More complex legally, of course.
And the third?
Hacking operations, carried out by Tailored Access Operations, or TAO.
GAO, SSO, TAO. Got it. Now what about Echelon? That name always pops up.
Echelon. Yeah, it's a big deal during the Cold War. A global surveillance network run primarily by the Five Eyes nations. The U.S., U.K., Canada, Australia, New Zealand. That intelligence sharing alliance. But Echelon itself is largely considered a legacy system now. Some of the old stations linked to it have closed.
So the UK-USA agreement, the Five Eyes, that's still very active.
Oh, absolutely. That collaboration is fundamental to how the NSA operates globally, sharing intelligence, resources, facilities.
Beyond Five Eyes, what other kinds of overseas operations are mentioned? Some sound pretty intense.
They do. The sources mention things like considering using sex intelligence gathered from monitoring people's sexual activity for potential blackmail.
Seriously, blackmail.
That's what was reported as being considered, yes. And also intercepting millions of images daily for facial recognition databases. The scale is just immense.
Millions a day. Wow. And there was something called the Real-Time Regional Gateway.
Yes. In Iraq, starting around 2005, it was designed to hoover up basically all electronic communication in the region, emails, phone calls, everything to target insurgents. And reports suggest it was quite effective.
This all seems to feed into that idea of a collect-it-all strategy, especially under Director Keith Alexander.
That's the argument some observers like Glenn Greenwald made, yes. That the approach became about mass archiving of global communications, just in case it might be useful later.
And the NSA's reach extends into, well, kinetic operations too, like drone strikes.
Reports indicate they provide location intelligence from signals intercepts to the CIA, which is then used for targeting in drone strikes, particularly in places like Pakistan and Yemen.
And spying on allies. That seems to be a recurring theme.
It does. Significant intelligence gathering targeted at the European Union, The UN and many governments, including allies.
Like France and Germany.
Yes, the 2015 revelations about spying on French companies and the long-running surveillance of German ministries, even Chancellor Merkel's personal phone, apparently starting way back in the 90s.
Which brings us inevitably to Edward Snowden in 2013.
The Snowden leaks. They blew the lid off the sheer scale of global data collection, phone metadata, internet activity using tools like Boundless Informant.
Though it's worth clarifying, right? Some of that data on Europeans was collected by European agencies first.
That's an important clarification, yes. Some of the initial reports were nuanced. European agencies collected data and then shared it with the NSA under various agreements. It wasn't solely the NSA vacuuming up European data directly in all cases.
One of the big challenges for the NSA is encryption, isn't it? Trying to get around it.
Always has been. And they've pursued various methods. The sources mentioned the Lotus Notes case back in the day.
What happened there?
Lotus wanted to export stronger encryption. An agreement was made where they could, but the software included a special workload reduction factor key, basically a backdoor for the NSA.
A software backdoor, built right in.
Exactly. But it's not just software. There were reports of physical interception, too. Grabbing packages with electronics inside, opening them, and implanting tracking beacons before sending them on their way.
Physically tampering with hardware.
Apparently so. And then there's this concept of boomerang routing.
What's that?
It's when your internet traffic, say from your computer in Toronto to a server also in Toronto, actually gets routed through the U.S. and back.
Even if it's staying within Canada.
Yes. It happens due to how the internet's infrastructure is set up. But the implication is, if your purely domestic Canadian traffic passes through U.S. networks, it could potentially be intercepted by the NSA there.
That's concerning for privacy in other countries.
It is. Research suggests that this could affect a large chunk of Canadian internet traffic, for instance. And for computers they physically get their hands on, there's something called the Cottonmouth device.
Cottonmouth.
It's a gadget disguised as a USB plug. You insert it, and it apparently gives the NSA remote access to the machine.
So despite all this, the NSA's official mandate under Executive Order 12333 is focused on foreign intelligence, right? With limits on domestic stuff.
That's the official line, yes. Foreign intelligence and counterintelligence. And they consistently say they rely on the FBI for domestic investigations within the U.S. borders.
There was that fake story in 2013 about a domestic surveillance directorate.
Right, that was quickly debunked. And the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution is supposed to protect against unreasonable searches and seizures domestically.
But programs like Highlander suggest maybe the line's blurred sometimes.
Well, the Highlander project reportedly did involve intercepting phone calls of U.S. citizens, along with foreign nationals, under a specific directive.
And the sheer volume of data that Fascia database Snowden revealed.
Trillions of device location records. Trillions. Gathered from cell towers, Wi-Fi hotspots, GPS, just a staggering amount of location data.
Let's talk about the hacking side more. TAO, Tailored Access Operations, active since the late 90s.
Around 1998, yes. And TAO is widely regarded as being extremely effective.
Especially regarding China.
Reports claim they had deep access into Chinese computer and telecom systems for nearly 15 years, pulling out huge amounts of intelligence.
But not always successful. Snowden mentions Syria.
Yeah, Snowden alleged that a TAO hacking attempt went wrong and accidentally knocked Syria almost completely off the internet back in 2012. The NSA hasn't confirmed that, of course.
It helps to picture the structure. How is the NSA actually organized?
Back in the mid-90s, the structure was based around 5 main directorates: Operations, Technology and Systems, Information Systems Security, which became ID plans, policy and programs, and support services.
And within those?
You had specialized groups, like a group focused on the Soviet bloc, G group on non-communist countries, and so on. Lots of numbered units under them.
They run their own internal network, too. NSA Net.
Yes, a highly secure internal network. Interestingly, some universities doing sensitive research have apparently been given access to it.
And that's where Snowden got the documents from.
That's right. The documents he leaked were stored on servers accessible via NSA Net, available to those with the right clearances, like system administrators.
How do they monitor things 24/7?
They have major watch centers, the National Security Operations Center, NSOC, for general monitoring, and the NSACS Threat Operations Center, NPOC, which is specifically focused on cyber threats.
And they have their own police.
They do. The NSA police.
Yeah.
Uniformed officers responsible for law enforcement and security at NSA's facilities. They even have K-9 units and marked cars.
Any idea how many people actually work there? The numbers are classified, right?
Officially classified, yes. But historical estimates run into the tens of thousands, especially during the Cold War peak. It's widely believed to be the world's largest employer of mathematicians.
Mathematicians. Makes sense for code breaking.
Absolutely. And some NSA staff are embedded within the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, working on satellite intelligence. As of 2013, the estimate was around 1,000 system administrators alone.
Has the NSA always had perfect security itself? Any breaches early on?
Oh no. Back in the 1960s, there were some significant issues. Two employees actually defected to the Soviet Union, and another former employee published a book revealing cryptologic secrets.
How did Congress react back then?
Interestingly, Congress seemed a bit reluctant to dig too deeply into those early affairs, but the NSA did tighten things up internally. Polygraph testing became standard.
Lie detectors.
Yes, including what they called special access examinations for people in the most sensitive jobs. Though there's always been debate about polygraphs, whether they truly detect lies or are more of an interrogation tool.
There's also been criticism about certain legal exemptions the NSA has.
Right. For example, the director having the power to fire employees essentially at will, without the usual civil service protections, and exemptions from things like the New Hire Registry, which tracks government hires.
Where is the NSA physically located? We mentioned Fort Meade.
Headquarters has been at Fort Meade, Maryland for a long time, after stints at the Naval Security Station and Arlington Hall.
And Fort Meade is massive.
Huge. Hundreds of acres, dozens of buildings, parking for thousands of cars. It has its own dedicated exits off the highway, one public, one marked NSA employees only. It's the biggest employer in Maryland.
What's the main building like?
It's often described as this giant, modern, somewhat imposing structure, covered in one-way dark glass and heavily shielded copper lining in the walls to block electronic signals getting in or out. Someone once said you could fit the U.S. Capitol building inside it several times over.
Wow, are there other big NSA sites in the U.S.?
Yes, several. There's the Friendship Annex near Baltimore, Buckley Space Force Base in Colorado, NSA Texas in San Antonio, NSA Georgia near Augusta, NSA Hawaii near Honolulu. There used to be a site at Sugar Grove, West Virginia, but that was slated for closure. And the National Computer Security Center, NCSC, was originally part of NSA, setting early computer security standards.
What about overseas? You mentioned the Five Eyes partnership.
Right. Big presence globally. RAF Menwith Hill in the UK is often called the world's largest electronic monitoring station. There's the European Cryptologic Center in Griesheim, Germany. And close partnerships and facilities within the other Five Eyes countries, UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand. Japan is also a key partner.
And Thailand.
Identified as a third-party partner. Sources mention at least two SIGINT sites there, one near Bangkok and a satellite intercept station up in Kon Kaen, codenamed Indore or Lemonwood.
Beyond collection, the NSA gets involved in policy too, right? Especially around encryption.
Definitely. They were major players in the crypto wars of the 1990s, concerning whether strong encryption could be exported. And they're central to securing U.S. government communications, designing custom hardware, software, chips, doing advanced crypto research.
Did they always build their own computers?
Historically, yes, a lot of specialized equipment. But later, especially into the 21st century, they shifted more towards contracting with private industry for much of their computing needs.
We've heard names like Clipperchip, Skipjack. What are those?
Examples of NSA-developed or influenced crypto tech. The Clipper chip was controversial. It was hardware encryption for phones, but had a built-in backdoor key for law enforcement. Skipjack was the algorithm inside it. Then you have Suite A and Suite B sets of cryptographic algorithms for protecting classified and sensitive government information. And the dual EC-DRBG random number generator, which had that suspected backdoor. Fortezza, SingChigar radios, SDE secure phones, TAC lane network encryptors. Lots of specific tech comes out of NSA work.
And programs like Perfect Citizen, what was that about?
That was aimed at assessing cyber vulnerabilities in U.S. critical infrastructure, power grids, financial systems, things like that. Shows their defensive role, too.
They fund academic research, too, don't they?
Heavily. Through grants, often coded MDA 904. And they publish internal journals, some eventually declassified, like Cryptolog, Cryptologic Quarterly, and the NSA Technical Journal.
But they've also tried to restrict academic crypto research sometimes.
There have been instances, yes, trying to prevent publication of research they felt could compromise security. It's a complex relationship. They also have the power to file patents under gag orders, keeping inventions secret.
Any known patents?
One describes a method to geolocate a computer using network latency, and they reportedly use trilateralization pinpointing location based on signal timing from multiple cell towers for real-time tracking.
What about the NSA's symbols, the eagle and key?
Right, their official seal or insignia. The eagle represents national scope, vigilance, and the key symbolizes, well, security and unlocking intelligence. They have an official flag, too.
And sadly, there's a memorial.
Yes, the National Security Agency Central Security Service Cryptologic Memorial. It's at Fort Meade, honoring personnel killed in the line of duty while serving the agency. A reminder of the human cost.
Okay, let's shift to the legal and privacy side. This has been a huge source of debate.
Massive. Especially around warrantless surveillance. There have been numerous lawsuits challenging NSA programs, cases brought by the CCR, ACLU, EFF, and others.
And Snowden just poured fuel on that fire in 2013.
Absolutely. His revelations about the sheer scale of bulk collection really intensified the debate. That led directly to the USA Freedom Act in 2015.
What did that change?
It ended the NSA's controversial bulk collection of U.S. phone metadata. Now, the telecom companies hold that data, and the NSA needs specific court orders to query it. But other concerns remain.
Like upstream collection.
Exactly. That's where the NSA taps into the physical internet backbone fiber optic cables to filter traffic. The scope and legality of that are still debated.
We also learned they pay telecoms for access.
Yes. Financial arrangements exist to compensate companies for the technical assistance and access required for surveillance.
There were also allegations about sharing intel with domestic law enforcement, like the DEA or IRS.
Yes. Reports suggested the NSA's Special Operations Division passed tips from foreign intercepts to agencies like the DEA, who would then use that information to start an investigation, but were allegedly instructed to recreate the evidence trail to hide the NSA's involvement, called parallel construction.
How is this justified legally?
Often by relying on a very broad interpretation of the Patriot Act, arguing basically all communications data could be relevant to terrorism investigations, which allowed for very wide collection.
There were even reports of personal misuse. Levant.
Unfortunately, yes. Levant refers to documented cases where NSA officers used their powerful surveillance tools to spy on romantic interests or partners, clearly illegal and unethical.
And targeting based on views, not just actions.
Claims emerged that individuals were sometimes targeted based on radical, religious, or political views, even without specific suspicion of illegal activity or terrorism links.
One of the most startling claims from the Snowden docs was about who was actually being surveilled.
Right. The Washington Post analysis suggested something like 90% of the account holders whose communications were gathered in one large sample were ordinary people, mostly Americans, not the intended foreign targets.
Huh.
They were caught in the net, incidentally.
And programs like XKeyscore.
XKeyscore raised huge privacy alarms. It's described as a system allowing analysts to search vast databases of internet data, emails, chats, browsing history, metadata, sometimes without prior court approval, just internal justification under certain rules.
How did the government respond to all this?
There were congressional hearings, reports. President Obama set up a review group on intelligence and communications technologies. The government also, interestingly, admitted blocking military personnel from accessing the Guardian newspaper's website after it published many of the Snowden leaks.
Even the UN weighed in.
Yes. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights condemned mass surveillance as violating fundamental privacy rights protected under international law.
More recently, the NSA was linked to that WannaCry ransomware attack.
Indirectly, yes. The attack in 2017 used an exploit called Eternal Blue, which had been developed by the NSA and was later leaked by a group called the Shadow Brokers.
So the NSA created the tool that caused the damage.
They created the vulnerability exploit, yes. The criticism was that they apparently knew about the flaw in Windows systems, but hadn't disclosed it to Microsoft soon enough, keeping it for their own offensive use, which then allowed criminals to weaponize it when it leaked.
There are also worries about where former NSA employees end up working.
Yes, concerns have been raised about highly skilled ex-NSA personnel going to work for private companies or even foreign governments, potentially including adversaries, taking their knowledge of U.S. cyber capabilities and vulnerabilities with them.
And very recently, more spying on allies came to light, Denmark helping spy on Germany.
Right. Reports in 2021 suggested Denmark's Secret Service helped the NSA spy on European officials, including Angela Merkel again, using Danish infrastructure. And the whole issue of government agencies simply buying vast amounts of commercially available data, like location data from apps, without needing warrants is another growing area of concern.
So wrapping this up, it's been quite a journey. From WWII, code breaking,
To a global intelligence behemoth dealing with everything from signals intercepts to cyber warfare and massive data analysis.
we've seen its origins, its evolution, the incredible scope of what it does.
And the really deep, persistent legal and ethical questions that swirl around an agency with this kind of power, especially regarding privacy.
Our goal, as always, was to give you a clear understanding of this complex entity and, frankly, its huge impact on the world we live in.
Which leaves us with a final thought, really. Something for you to chew on.
Yeah.
In this digital world where everything is connected, how do we find that balance? The balance between needing security as a nation.
And protecting our fundamental rights as individuals, our privacy. What's the right level of oversight? How much transparency can we demand or expect from agencies operating in secrecy but with such far-reaching power?
It's not an easy question. There are no simple answers.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely critical that we keep asking it, thinking about it, as we figure out the role of agencies like the NSA in a democracy.